Welcome to the Blueprint Podcast, where we throw out the old blueprint so you can become who you were always meant to be. I'm your host, Jason Smith, and if you haven't already, make sure you click the subscribe button, share this podcast with your friends on social media, and tag me in it at JBirdFit. Today, I have a very special guest for you, Adam Allred. Adam is a leading voice in helping men step out of their comfort zones, develop discipline, and reclaim authentic masculinity. Adam is the founder of the Doughboy movement, which emphasizes rejecting complacency, embracing struggle, and taking ownership of one's life. Through his platform, Adam challenges modern men to push past their limits and forge strength and character through intentional action. His content and community have helped countless men cultivate resilience, confidence, and a clear sense of direction. He speaks openly about the dangers of passivity and the importance of personal responsibility and necessity of surrounding yourself with the right people to achieve meaningful growth. In this conversation, we'll explore why comfort can be one of the biggest obstacles to real growth, how men can develop unshakable confidence without relying on external validation, and the importance of building brotherhood with like-minded men. Adam will also share his own experiences of pushing past limits, reclaiming personal power, and challenging modern narratives around masculinity. If you've ever felt stuck, unsure of your next move, or trapped in a cycle of complacency, this episode is for you. Adam Allred, welcome to the Blueprint Podcast.
Jason, super glad to be here, man. Been looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I've been looking at your content, and one of the first things I saw was this fireside chat that you had with a group of men sitting down, having a conversation, and really pouring into them in the moment. I heard you say comfort is the enemy of greatness. It's certainly something many of us experience. When was the moment you realized firsthand, and what did it take to break free from that mindset?
Oh, that's a good question, man. Another way I like to articulate it is complacency is death. So we live in this world of entropy where we have like whatever you build, whatever you work for is going to be getting eroded away at. And I think too often, particularly us men who carry a lot of responsibilities on our shoulders to show up and provide and take care of those on our watch and stuff, we can feel pretty overwhelmed by that. And so oftentimes we're looking for arrival points, right? Like we get to a point where we arrive and then we can put that on the back burner, but that's just not really how life works. And so to answer your question, for me, it's been a process of learning that. But I think part of it was when I was going through college and I realized like I saw so many guys doing things that they weren't happy about, like just because they did the status quo. They got the degree, they got a job or a career or whatever that looked like. And now it's 20 years later and it's not that they're just absolutely miserable, but it's like they're not satisfied in what they're doing. And they're just working every day because they got bills to pay. They got to show up for responsibilities. And I realized, like, for me, if I wanted to be happy in that aspect of my life, in the aspect of my career, it had to be like one of two options. I either had to find something that I was just deeply passionate about, and then you're just naturally going to love it. And it doesn't matter how much exactly you're getting paid, but you're going to love what you're doing and you're going to naturally be good at it and work at it. Or you find something that makes you a lot of money and sets you free. And I didn't have something that I was passionate about. So I had to take the latter option, at least as far as I was concerned, how I was processing this is, I got to find something that I can do to make a lot of money so that I could then have the freedom to do things that I was really passionate about. And that process of going into business for myself was an entire process of learning that complacency is death and that comfort is the enemy of success. And that if you want something in life, you can get it, but there's a price tag for everything. Everything has a price tag and you have to pay that price. And if you want something to last, you have to continue to pay a price for that in perpetuity. So there's no arrival. And as men, we shouldn't be looking for an arrival point. Like the successes, becoming a millionaire, or whatever that looks like for you as an individual, like the success, those have to be put in their proper context as just mile markers on what really matters. And that's the journey. It's the process. The most valuable thing that we get out of life is the process of going through this world of entropy and all of the lessons that come with that and developing the character of who we are, because that is our most important product. That is the most important commodity that we have is our character and what we've developed. And so everything else is just like a side quest and everything else is just a mile marker on that journey.
Yeah, one of the questions you hit on, and I think so many of us get to this point where you're a decade into your career and you've done all the things that you know that you're supposed to do, that the world told you to do. You're at that point, but you're at that place where you're just like, you're struggling, you're going through it. It's frustrating. You're irritated. There might be some sadness, a little loneliness, isolation, and depression. You start to ask yourself the question of, is this really all life has to offer to me? in this moment. You've got more gas in the tank, you're capable of more, but you feel weighed down by some of your other responsibilities. For the guy that's in that place right now where he's struggling and trying to figure out maybe what's next, or he's afraid to take that first step into uncertainty, what would you tell him?
One, you have to, I think first you have to fundamentally decide as a man who you are, or at least who you want to become. So who is that character that is your best version? If you can imagine the most dynamic, healthy, powerful, vibrant version of yourself, that ideal version, what does that person look like? And start there. And a lot of times for men, that's not going to come like necessarily internally. You're going to look externally for people that are already at places that you want to be, mentors or people on social media or coaches or family members that you can look at and be like, man, that guy's got his act together. The things that he's done with his life is something I want to do as well. So first, really deciding what it is that you want out of life. Because I know, for example, and maybe this is answering your question, eh, people will say to me all the time, I hear this all the time over the course of my life, I want to be a millionaire, right? I want to make a lot of money, but they're
Don't
not
we
really
all?
being, yeah, don't we all? But
Yeah.
they're not really being honest with themselves because what they really want to do is have an easy job and come home and watch Netflix. And that's what they really want to do because that's what they're doing. You actually do what you really want to do. And so until there gets to a point where you're like, hey, I'm not happy with the status quo, which is where so many men are at, to your point. They with this quiet desperation pandemic that men are just going through in life where they die at 30 and are buried at 80. They're just going through responsibility after responsibility that's generally been handed to them by somebody else. They haven't been wrecked by a divorce. A lot of times they're in like dead end relationships. They're alone in a relationship and they have these mounting responsibilities. They're piling up and they're suffocating underneath that. And so it's easy to feel like life is happening to you. And you got to switch that mindset and say, life is happening for me. And I've got to start seizing the day. So first I got to decide what it is that I want to be. What's the best version of me? And that'll evolve. It's not like you have to nail it down perfectly right out the gates, but you first got to see what's a better version of me. And then once you recognize what that is, you can start piecing together things that will help you to get to that point without having to do some colossal white knuckle like feat of discipline. You start surrounding yourself by influences that are going to direct you towards that outcome. And so that's going to look like podcasts that you're listening to every single day. That's going to look like books that you're reading every single day. It's going to be who you surround yourself with. A lot of guys don't have any good mentorship in their life. They don't have any good group of friends, which is really tragic. And men have to have that. And so in the absence of that, you can start with virtual mentors, going on podcasts like this, or finding people on social media that you want to follow and you listen to their advice and you start to really inundate these things. Because what we're going through in this life, this conscious state, which is really complex, is we're basically working with technology, this biological computer that we have that is us. And essentially, we're operating with this processor on all this programming that we've been given throughout the course of our whole lives. It's just running its course, this programming. Most of us are on autopilot. We're just operating on whatever programming over the course of how many years we've been on this earth that have led to the culmination of this process right now that is you. And to be able to fundamentally change that, it's not going to take some great act of discipline, a single act. It takes a lot of consistency, right? Where you start to rewrite the programming by getting new software updates. And as you change your software, you actually will naturally change your outlook. Software or programming leads to thoughts. Thoughts lead to emotions. Emotions lead to actions, and actions lead to your reality. So if you're not where you want to be, it's not that the universe is against you. It's not that you've been dealt the wrong set of cards, hand of cards, or whatever to play. It's that you're not playing them the right way, and that you may have to do some serious updating on the cards that you have in your hand, at least in terms of your software. And when you can orient yourself each day that way, where you're seizing the day now, you're no longer like just going through this checklist responsibility process. It's the old outdated programming that's not working for you. You're rewriting that. And every single day you're conscientiously making decisions, which requires some discipline to update your software and to improve it. When you can orient yourself that way, dude, in that moment, that's when you're endowed with power. That's when you can really start to make some serious changes. And those will lead to manifestations of actions in your lives, whether that's getting new levels of education or new experiences or whatever that looks like, new development in different aspects of masculinity. Those things will start to naturally present themselves. And you just got to be willing to seize the day and stop letting the day seize you.
Now, if you guys are listening to all that, he just gave you a framework of how to get started in your journey of self-discovery and becoming the person that you're capable of becoming. So I would go back, listen to that again, take a few notes, and start to get a really good picture of who you are right now and who you want to become. And the distance in between those things is where the work is going to happen.
And the work is the best part. That's how you have to change your
Yeah.
mindset. That is the best part of the process. It's the hardest part, but hard is good. And as long as we keep looking at hard as being bad, we're looking for the shortcuts or we're looking for the easy way outs, our lives are going to continue to look mediocre at best. And usually they're going to start to look really bad. So it's about orienting yourself towards that work and saying, I like to work on myself. I like to improve myself. And the work and the process is what really matters.
Now, the challenge is when we start doing the work is there's going to be a lot of rejection from the people that are closest to you because they have an idea of who you are in the back of their head. They have this file, this framework. This is who you are. I know who you are. I know what you're capable of. And they'll tell you you're a fraud and you're a fake and you can't do any of this stuff. So when somebody's going through that, how can they begin to just navigate that experience with other people and not take it personally?
So I'm gonna go back to mindset again because everything to me starts fundamentally with your
Yeah.
mindset, which just starts with the programming. So it's the right programming for the to get the right mindset. As men, we are conditioned by our nature and by society because we're supposed to be the providers that we are measured on external things. So men continually look for external validations for us to have. We think that if we get enough external validations, we'll get respect and we'll get respect from external sources. And this is something that, again, another paradigm that we have to shift and reorient ourselves towards is it's not about the output, it's about the input. The output will take care of itself. So whatever's going on externally, people hating on you and telling you you can't do it or doubts or whatever's on the outside, or even the successes when you hit these moments of achievement, none of that really is what you are focused on. You're just focused ultimately on the inputs and you have to have some faith here. You got to, this is what, to me, what faith actually means. It's going through the process and believing that if you continue along the process that you're going to arrive at some point. Faith to me, and I've grown up religious and I believe that faith as a principle was something that if you followed enough commandments and if you prayed hard enough, then God would just miraculously start manifesting things in your life. And that's never really how it's worked for me. And in the last 5 or 6 years, I've really changed that. And my orientation towards that has changed. And I believe that faith is actually work. That's all it is. If you want to move a mountain, do you have enough faith to pick up a wheelbarrow and a shovel and start shoveling? And you're going to be shoveling for a long time, but do you believe you can do that? And there's going to be a lot of people saying you can't move a mountain, you can't move a mountain, but you don't focus on that. And you don't focus even on the people encouraging. It's great to get encouragement. You're just focusing on yourself, the inputs. And if you focus on the inputs long enough, the outputs always take care of themselves. If your primary focus is to develop, and that's your purpose. And I believe that's the purpose of every man ultimately. Like we have a lot of side quests in life, but our primary purpose is to be the best version of ourselves because when we're the best version of ourselves, we're better in every other aspect that we are responsible for. So your primary purpose as an individual, as a human, as a man, is to make this avatar, this construct, the most powerful, vibrant version of itself. And you do that by the inputs, the daily inputs every single day, orienting your day to be more constructive than the day before. You don't have to hit a home run. You don't have to be some all-star. You don't have to have some set of cards or some sort of successes prior to this. You just have to say, I'm going to start doing the work. And the work is me just focusing on making me better in every aspect of my character that I possibly can, that I have the bandwidth and the ability for. And that will grow and expand as you do this. And it'll naturally start to result in external successes. But again, that's not the point. That's just like the icing on the cake. It's like a nice, like, validation, but it's not the point. You're getting the real validation from yourself because at the end of the day, the most important relationship a man is ever going to have is a relationship that he has with himself. It's not with other people and it's not their opinions of you. You got to start being a free agent that is acting for for the betterment of yourself and not playing the actor role for what other people expect of you.
And when you make that decision to finally believe in yourself, you'll no longer outsource your well being to other people and seek that validation from others to approve of anything that you're doing because you're clear on your mission, your vision, your purpose, where you're going, what you're doing, and the why behind why you're doing it. But it takes a pivot. And I'm no stranger to making pivots in my own life, but I'm curious, has there been a time where you've had to make some pivots in your own life that have brought you to where you are today?
There's been so many times, and those moments come. I'll just share one experience with you that was like this massive catalyst for how I learned a lot of these valuable lessons, at least that where a lot of these lessons started. My career, I do door-to-door sales, and now I build businesses with door-to-door sales. Is what I've done for the last 22 years, and door-to-door sales is like the hardest one of the hardest jobs you can possibly have.
Yeah.
And for me, I got recruited when I was in college, and I got sent out. My first summer was in Detroit. I went out to Detroit and I knocked on these doors selling home security systems. And I had no context for how well I was going to do, but I'd been told that if I did X amount of accounts, if I did 100 accounts in the summertime, I'd be paid 40 grand. And this is 23 years ago. It was some astronomical sum as a poor college kid that couldn't even afford to pay for semesters of school. Like, I could make $40,000 in the summertime. I'm going to give this a shot. So I put everything on the line. I didn't have a lot of money. I had enough money to pay for gas to drive out there with my buddy who I recruited as well. We got out to Detroit, started knocking doors, and I knocked almost 12 hours the first day that I was out there and didn't sell anything. And I needed to sell one a day to get 100 accounts. And 100 accounts was a lot. So that wasn't, the guys were usually selling a lot less than that, but I had that as my goal. So I wanted 100 accounts that summer. My first day, I didn't make any sales. My second day, I didn't make any sales. And my third day, I still had 0 sales. And I'd never worked so hard in my entire life, mentally, physically, spiritually. And at the time I was reading this book by Collins and LaPierre about Gandhi, and how Gandhi had fasted like 30 days to stop the Muslims and the Hindus from killing each other. And I thought, man, if Gandhi could fast 30 days and express some modicum of faith, I'm going to fast until I make a sale. That was my thing.
Right.
I'm going to put my faith in God, my faith in moving the mountain, and I'm going to trust that God's going to help me do this. And so I actually started a fast, and my fourth day, I went without making any sales, and I was something like 40 hours into this fast. And it was in the evening. The car that would pick us up for lunch had passed me by because I was still fast. I'm like, I'm going to get a sell. I'm going to sell. But I got to the point where I was like the walking dead out there. Like, I just couldn't function mentally. I had no energy. I had no calories. I was showing up on people's doors and wasn't even getting close anymore. So earlier, I'd gotten some that were close to making a sell. And I was like, I can't keep going like this. Like, I have to get some food if I'm going to even I'm just sound like an idiot right now. I can't even formulate a constructive sentence to talk to people. So they're just slamming the doors in my face, and I'm like shaky and stuff. And I'm trying to give this pitch. And there was
Where's this guy tweaking? What's going on?
Exactly. Like, I'm just going to haven't had any food or water for 40 something hours, which is, the water part was probably pretty stupid, but it was this whole faith thing that I was doing. And so there was this little Caesars in my neighborhood that was down at the end of the corner. I was in some pretty rough neighborhood. So I go down to this little Caesars at 6:30 at night, 7 o'clock at night. And normally our days go to about 9 or 10 o'clock, you're knocking. And I bought this hot and ready pizza, and I got a warm 2-liter Sprite because if the cooler wasn't working, or the fridge or whatever. And I was sitting in this parking lot with shell casings, like needles, used contraceptives. I'm sitting in the broken glass. I'm just sitting there eating this pizza. And I love Little Caesars, no knock on it, and it got me through college. But it's probably the worst thing that you can put in your system when you've been fasting for 40 something hours, plus some warm Sprite. So now, not only am I like, I've been shaky and I'm calorie deficient, but now I'm starting to get sick. Like, I'm getting nauseous. Like, I'm going to throw up. And I recognized, up to my point, I was 23 at the time, that this was the lowest point of my entire life. I was at it. I was like, this is the worst place. I've invested everything into this. I've given everything I have. I'm 4 days into this process. I haven't made a single sale, which wasn't unusual, by the way, for the process, but for me it was. I expected I would be doing better. And I'm having a faith crisis. I fasted, and now I failed the fast. I didn't even fast until I made a sale. So I'm like, I'm not even good enough to do that. And I was this whole kind of existential crisis in this moment of who I was. And I don't know exactly what got me through that process. At some point, I realized that all I had left, my confidence, everything that I believed about myself, had been stripped away in this very short period of time. But I realized that I had one of two options. I could either quit and go home and try and lick my wounds and figure out how I was going to make money for the summer, or I had to make the decision that no matter how hard the process was, that I was going to stick it out. And even if I didn't make a single dollar that summer, one sale, I was going to prove to myself that I wasn't a quitter. That was my option. And that's what I ended up picking. I was like, okay, I'm just going to get back up, and I'm going to go back knocking. And whatever happens this summer, this is for my own personal development. It's no longer about making money to pay for school or anything else. It's about going through this process. And on some level, I recognized in this communication with God in this parking lot in the middle of Detroit that this was a crossroads for me. This was going to be a catalyst for my future, one way, one direction or the other. And so I got back up, not feeling probably worse than the week before I got to Little Caesars. And I started knocking. And that night I sold 2 accounts. And the next day I sold 2 accounts. And the next day I sold 2 accounts. And the next day I sold 3 accounts. And the next day I sold 3 accounts. And within a short period of time, I was the number one rep out of 300 reps in the entire company. Like I just went up and people were calling me from HQ who had no idea who I was. Like, who's this kid that's just performing, blowing up these numbers out in Detroit? What are you doing? I'm like, man, I don't know. I just didn't quit. I just got to that breaking point where you were at rock bottom and I didn't quit. And rock bottom is a solid foundation to rebuild. And that was a lot of that process that summer was for me to reorient myself towards difficulty, towards the process, towards what it is that I really wanted out of life and who I really wanted to be. And I did not want to be a quitter. I knew that just in my core. That's what I got to. I didn't know that before that Little Caesars event. But after that Little Caesars event, I knew that I was not going to quit anything in my life that I knew I needed to do and I'd committed myself to.
You decided to let go of the expectation or detach from the expectation or allow yourself to surrender the expectation that this is something that has to happen. I'm going to stay in the moment. I'm going to be present. I'm going to do this. I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to continue to move forward. I'm going to have a belief in myself that this is something that is already done, that it's going to happen. And once you release that expectation, now it becomes so much easier for you to get out there and to be more of who you are as you're going door to door, and people are going to relate to you and be drawn to you in that moment.
Yeah, that's really insightful. And ultimately, what I was doing was I was removing the external validations and saying
Right.
what mattered to me now was the internal validations. What kind of character was I developing? And the external validations are great. We all want them. I'm not saying that we don't, and we should be
Good
seeking
job.
after those.
Yeah.
Yeah, and more like
Everybody
40
wants
grand,
that.
or like you made some good money. That's an external validation. You come home with a bunch of money in your pocket as a practical
Yeah.
application. So I'm not oblivious to that, but ultimately those things arrive when you focus on the internal. And when I no longer was seeking for the external validations in terms of a number of sales to get each day, and I was instead saying, hey, I'm here for the process and I'm going to do the work. And whatever that looks like on the external side is going to take care of itself. And I finished that summer with 109 accounts. So I beat the goal that I set out to get, which was
That's
a high goal. It put me in that I didn't finish number one in the company. I finished number 10, but I was a rookie. And there was a lot of experienced guys that had years of a head start on me, but I finished number 10 in the company that year. And it was a singularity event for my entire life that set the trajectory. And the truth is that if I had quit, that would have put me on a completely different trajectory. If I'd gone home, and I had every excuse to, I had every reason to quit, at least in my mind, right? I'm not doing this. I'm not making money. I got bills to pay. This sucks. This is super, super hard. And I'm getting no recompense for that externally. Anyways, it would just became, it was just, it really was such a crossroads. And I think we're faced with those throughout our lives. So you can pivot and change. If you've been quitting your whole life, you have the ability, like I did when you're at rock bottom, to reorient yourself towards this whole process by changing the way that you think about it. And that so much of like our world is determined, I would say all of it, all of our reality is determined ultimately by how we think. And again, that's why it's so important to work on the programming, making sure you're getting the right software updates every single day.
And another important piece to take away from this is whatever you do consistently over long periods of time, you're going to achieve a result. Now, it might not be the result exactly that you're looking for, but you will get a result. And you have to be open to the way that comes to you, the different pathways that's going to happen. So you might have this expectation of how I'm going to do this, and that's how it's going to happen. I'm going to get my money and I'm going to be good to go. But it can come from other directions. You might have somebody that has an influence over you, some sort of mentorship, or you end up finding a book on Gandhi at 23 years old, which I'm really curious about. How did you come across that at that age?
Oh, I was an English major and I've always liked reading. So I just digested books all the time. And yeah, that's where it started as far as
Yeah,
picking up a
no,
book
it's
about
interesting.
Gandhi.
So if you had a book to tell us that the audience, you should read this book, what's the one book that you would tell people to read?
Oh, shoot. I get asked this question. I ask this question too sometimes, and it's a hard one to answer because it's like, what do you pick? There's so many good books.
Oh, yeah.
A couple of the ones that are like have been some of the biggest influences in my life is As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. It's a real small read. I've probably read it 100 times in my life. It just puts a lot of things into perspective and
Yeah.
really clarifies a lot of the fog that I had early on in life about how life works and how we work and how the process is. Another fantastic book, it's a little off topic from what we're talking about, but it's a mindset book, is Man's Search for Meaning. That book has
Yeah.
absolutely changed my life. I could go through a long list of
Same.
books that have changed my life, but I would put those two certainly up in the top echelons of the books that I've read.
No, I agree. Stimulus and response, man. That space in between, it's important.
Yes, sir.
Now, when we get into relationships, you emphasize that a man must know himself before he can lead in relationships. What hard truth did you have to confront about yourself before stepping into your power or leadership?
One of them is that nobody's going to respect you if you don't respect yourself. No one is. So you can spend all day long looking for respect from a wife or from coworkers or from whatever that looks like. But until you respect yourself, none of that is going to ever happen. And the way that we learn to respect ourselves is we learn to do that by keeping commitments to ourselves. It's the only way I know how to do it. You can't respect somebody you can't trust. And we know that when we're in relationships with other people. There's people that we like. I have a lot of friends that I like that I would say, I don't want to say I don't respect them because that sounds like I disrespect them. I don't disrespect them, but I recognize that I don't want to be like them. They're not
Yeah.
living the life that I want to live, and they're not living the life that they're even proud of. And so even though I love them and they're my homies, I don't have a certain level of respect for them because they don't keep commitments and I can't trust them. Where the same thing applies to us. And we so often don't keep commitments to ourselves. Subconsciously, we'll constantly say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And then we don't do it. I'm going to get up tomorrow early. And then we sleep through the alarm or whatever. I'm going to start going to the gym. And then we go once or twice and then we stop going. And every time we do that, we erode away our trust in ourselves. Therefore, we erode away our confidence and we erode away our self respect. And so, first, it starts as a man. You say, I'm going to start what I say I'm going to do. I'm going to do. And so you have to be really careful about what you say you're going to do because you have to trust yourself. It starts there. And once you get that part down where you're like, what I say I'm going to do, I'm going to do. The next step is having boundaries. Excuse me. And you say, look, I respect myself enough that I'm not going to let somebody else disrespect me because this person that is me, I love so much. I care about this kid that's inside. I'm governing this process and I got to take care of that person first because if that person's unhealthy, every other experience I have in life is going to be healthy, including the most important relationships that you have in life as a husband and as a father. If that internal person isn't healthy, nothing else is going to be healthy in your life. And so you focus on yourself, not from a place of selfishness, but a place from reality that until you're your best version, you're never going to show up personally with yourself. You're never going to show up as your best version with anybody else. And so you just really focus on that process and you make commitments to yourself and you hold boundaries for yourself. I learned that going through my first marriage. I didn't hold boundaries for myself in my first marriage. And I can point the finger at her like we always do when we go through divorces. It's always the other person's fault. But the reality is just so much of the responsibility of that relationship, the way it turned out, was on me. And she had her own responsibility in that too. I'm not saying it was obviously a joint venture to be in a marriage, but my responsibilities was, I take responsibility for so much of how that marriage turned out. And a lot of it was because I didn't understand how important it was that I had respect for myself and that I didn't tolerate disrespect. And when you hold boundaries, particularly with women, I'll say it like this: a woman only trusts a man, which means she's only attracted to a man that she respects. So that starts with the man respecting himself and the man having boundaries. She has to understand on some fundamental level that if she crosses your boundaries, and she needs her own, this isn't like a one-sided thing, but if she crosses your boundaries, there are consequences for that. And I don't mean that like in the parenting sense. I mean that in like, I'm going to withdraw. Like my boundaries are important to me enough that if I'm around somebody that is mistreating me, I'm not going to engage in it. I'm not going to be petty. I'm not going to get in a fight with it. I'm not going to try and rationalize with it. I'm going to separate myself from it, at least for a time, and then come back and talk about it. And if the behavior doesn't change, if there's a chronic disrespect now from the person that's supposed to be the most important relationship in my life, eventually, and probably sooner rather than later, I'm going to leave. And I learned that from my first marriage, being in it for too long, for 8.5 years of just a slugfest that never ever saw. We got down this rabbit hole early on, and a lot of it was because I didn't know how to manage it with these things we're talking about right now. And once you get down that rabbit hole, it's almost impossible to get out of it. Like you to get so ingrained in the fabric of that relationship that it's like it's really hard to turn it around. So it's important that you have, like with so many things, the start is important. And it's not that you can't make changes and adjustments later. You can, but it's so much harder than if you just start off right, the right way. And that starts fundamentally with you having a healthy relationship with yourself.
Now, a lot of people sit there and negotiate with themselves about everything, and they'll negotiate themselves out of a relationship, out of a career path, out of making money. How can we begin to wire in that new perspective of self when you have a habit or a pattern of negotiating with yourself over
Yeah,
everything?
it goes back to that software stuff, which is going to help you become more self-aware. So a lot of us are doing this subconsciously. We don't even recognize it because it's become so habitual. It's the same thing like in a relationship. Like we've already had such a bad start that we're down a rabbit hole. Now, the good news is when you're talking about just a relationship with yourself, you have total control over it. You don't have that in a relationship with somebody else. You only have part of the influence of that. But ultimately, if they're not willing to show up, you can't force anybody to do anything, but you can start to make some changes about yourself. And it goes back to that software stuff. It's rewriting your paradigm and perspective on life. So many people go through life feeling like a victim, and victimization, that victim mindset, is like the lowest frequency we as humans can emit. It's the worst state that you can possibly be in, is when you're feeling sorry for yourself and thinking like life is against you and not working for you. But the truth is, it's only against you to the extent that's your perception. When you start to like really take ownership of it, extreme ownership of your life, and recognizing ultimately everything in your life is your responsibility. It doesn't mean you get to control all the events, but you get to control how you respond to them. You get to control two fundamental things: your attitude and your effort. And those are the two things that we all have direct control over. And for a lot of guys that have failed to rise up for themselves up to this point in their life, if you don't change, nothing's going to change. So if you want to change and you're serious about it, and you're not just talking about it or just complaining and shaking your fist at the heaven thinking you got shortchanged, if you're really serious about making your life better, it's going to start with saying, hey, it's not God's fault. It's not my wife's fault. It's not this fault, but it's not my parents' fault. It's my responsibility. And it may not even be your fault what's led up to this, but it's your responsibility. That's what it is. You got dealt this, and now it's your responsibility. And you just have to take ownership of that. And then when you do that, you stop trying to negotiate with yourself. You stop breaking commitments to yourself. You start to level up a little bit. The wheels you're spinning in dirt, they start to catch a little bit. You move forward a little bit, and then something kicks your ass. You get knocked back a little bit, and you keep going, and then you get those wheels spin again. Reorient yourself. You're never a victim. Life isn't happening to you. It's happening for you. I can't say that enough. I don't know who originally said
Yeah,
that,
I don't
but
know.
it's brilliant because it's just so true. So life is all about this teaching curriculum where we get to learn from it. And to the extent that we're learning, everything starts to make sense. And to the extent that we're feeling sorry for ourselves and putting our walls up, nothing makes sense. And your life just gets really bad really quick.
Yeah, that's one of the key components right there, is that ability to learn. Are you willing to self-educate? Because there's more than enough free information out there. You don't need to buy a course. You don't really need to find a mentor or a coach, because there's so much free information out there. There's YouTube channels, podcasts, audibles. Like, you can dig into all this stuff and begin to teach yourself. The issue is usually that you don't then deploy what you've learned in real time in your life. For whatever reason, you don't think that you can, or I need to have a PhD in order to do all of these things. And that's just not the case. Like, you have to take ownership of your life and recognize that you're the only one that's ultimately going to care about your well-being in the long term. And you have to become who you're capable of becoming, or you will suffer for your entire life.
And it's easy. It's really, yeah, that's spot on. And it's really easy. We do it all the time to play the comparison game. So
Yeah.
it gets really discouraging when we see people that are further down the road than us. And then it's often
Especially when they're in their 20s and you're like, what happened?
you're like, I'm in my 40s and this kid's done more with his life than I am.
Son of
You're
a
like,
God.
it's a,
I need a
it can
YouTube channel.
be rough. It can be rough. It can be rough on the ego.
Yeah.
One, the comparison game is somewhat helpful, but you got to manage that really so you don't get stuck in this notion of like, other people had it better than me, therefore I have an excuse to be checked out from this because they had this and I didn't get this. The truth is that all of us, every single one of us humans, we have the exact same currency. Every single one of us. Then the fundamental initial currency translates into other currencies in life. But the first currency that everybody has is time. Everybody has the exact same amount of time in a day. We have 24 hours. That's what we have. And that's not equal because some of us are wrestling with things that other people aren't wrestling with. It's not
Right.
necessarily completely getting this. It's obviously not getting the same return. But the reason why other people are more successful than others is because they're spending their currency differently. They're spending their time differently. And when you can get yourself out of the external factors again and saying, oh, they got this, they had this leg up, they had this, and therefore I'm off the hook from having to improve because I don't have those things, which is just the recipe for your life being miserable. You start to say, okay, how are they spending their time? What is it that they're actually doing with that currency? And then that currency translates into other forms of currency that translates into resources. And now you start spending that time better. And now you're getting a better return on that time. You're starting to make some other resources. Now you can invest money. And now that time, that 1 hour block or that 2 hour block, it starts to compound because you have more resources. You can leverage yourself and you can start to get more traction, more success. And it's a synergistic process. But it starts so much just with that mindset of owning who you are and where you're at and not making any excuses for yourself.
I want to hone in on the young guys for a second. Us as Gen Xers, we're the Goonie generation. We're a little bit more chronically resilient, and adaptable in the way that we approach problems and struggles and challenges. But A lot of young men tend to feel lost right now, whether it's in relationships, career, or purpose. What's the key to developing unshakable self respect, or at least begin to find the map for their own life?
Yeah, it starts with everything that we're saying right now, figuring out who do you want to be? And that's not like something you do in an afternoon. You don't just sit down and write down a few notes. That maybe where it starts. You start to sit down and have some time with yourself to dig into this, but you start just opening your eyes up to where other people are at on the mountainside. We're all climbing up this mountain of life. And what is it that where do I want to be? And what do I want to look like? Who do I want to be when I get there? And so it starts with defining that. And the problem with so much of what's going on in society today is this attack on masculinity, that masculinity is labeled as toxic. And so many of us have just allowed that to become the stand, what we say now and we believe now. Again, it goes back to programming. And because of this attack on masculinity that's been going on for decades, fathers have been removed from the home, either because they've left, or because they've been pushed out, or because they're there, but they're just playing the bystander role. They're just like the ATM that brings home some money to pay for the bills, but aren't taking an active participation in raising their kids, particularly fathers raising their sons. I think this is the greatest epidemic that we're seeing, and the most dangerous epidemic we're seeing in society is the removal of fathers from the home. And so you have this generation of boys right now, a large percentage of them that are being raised primarily by women. And they go through a school system that's dominated predominantly by women, and they go into adulthood having no idea what a man is or what purpose is or what that means. And essentially what they're doing, even when they get into a relationship, is looking for a woman to replace the mother of their youth. A woman that can give them purpose, tell them what to do, just like they've been told their whole lives. And it's so depressing for everybody. It's not a win for women. It's certainly not a win for men. And so recognizing, even if that's been your process up to this point as a young man, recognizing that you have the ability to break that. You still always have control over those two things, your attitude and your effort. So reframing yourself towards life, coming up with who that ideal version is, that of you, your purpose, what's driving you, that's not related to somebody else, just you and your journey. What does that look like? And then working consistently, like you said earlier, consistency is the key. It's not these huge leaps that we make, but it's the small incremental steps that we're taking every single day that are manageable. Jordan Peterson says this, how do you make your life better? He's generally talking to young men in this. He says, figure out how you can make tomorrow 1% better than today. I'm ruining the quote a little bit, but the message is there. Like, you don't have to go tomorrow and be Superman. You don't have to be that ideal version tomorrow. You just got to tomorrow make tomorrow better than today. If you got up at 9 o'clock today, tomorrow get up at 8:30 or 8 o'clock. You can do that. That's a change where you start to spend that time in the morning constructively to prepare yourself for the battle, because every day is a struggle. And so getting yourself in fighting shape, you start to find these little things that you can develop. Get yourself healthy, start going to the gym or go outside, whatever that looks like. Do something that's active. Keep yourself walking and moving. Motion creates more motion, and stagnation creates more stagnation. So just get up, be moving. Don't be sitting around thinking about all these things that you should be doing, but get up and start moving, figure out who you want to be and start adding some curriculum to that. And most of my mentors, I have a lot of mentors. The vast majority of mentors are people I've never met. They're authors, they're podcasters, they're influencers that I listen to. And I get an enormous amount of value doing that daily. And I can do that when I'm outside walking. We all have these high powered computers in our back pocket. So I can be moving and keep myself active. And all of a sudden your life starts to turn from black and white. It starts getting a little color in it. And then all of a sudden it's HD. And you're like, dude, it's 5 years since I made this commitment to myself to start making some changes. And I wasn't perfect the whole time. Far from it. I had my ups and downs, but I didn't quit. I kept going. And now it's 5 years later. My life is completely different than it was. I don't even know that kid 5 years ago. And I think that's one of the things that we have an obligation to put in perspective is we have an obligation to that future self. I look back on that kid that was in Detroit, that young man that had not received a lot of these life lessons up to this point, but didn't quit. He kept going that summer. And I have an enormous amount of gratitude for him. It's almost like I feel this intense gratitude for a different person. It doesn't even feel like me. It feels like somebody I owe a debt to. That kid showed up for me, for this character that I am now. And I want to make sure that I'm showing up for my future self. So 20 years later, that guy, whoever that guy is, looks back on this guy as, man, I'm grateful that dude didn't quit. I'm grateful that guy just kept leveling up and kept moving. I feel that obligation. It's so poignant with me. It's like close to my heart. I sometimes get emotional talking about it.
What do you tell the person that is currently emotionally paralyzed, where they carry this shame that they've had their entire life? They may not know necessarily where it came from, but it prevents them from doing the things that they know that they need to be doing. How can they begin to navigate out of that?
Shame is a horrible place to be, and I don't believe in shame. I believe it's something that we condition so many of us with in
Yeah,
society. There's so much shame that gets dealt or out
it's
from church,
everywhere.
from culture, from family, and we think that we can shame people into better performance, and we even think we can shame ourselves into performing better. There's this idea that if I just proverbially flog myself enough, that there'll be some penance there. And so again, it's all mindset. It's changing the way that we think about that. I'll tell one story on that. When I was in my single dad phase, I was not in a healthy place. I was in the lowest point of my life, and yet I had responsibility for 3 other humans that were on my watch, and they were the ones that got me up and going every day. But when I got up and going every day, I was far from perfect. I was really struggling to be able to provide. I was laden with a lot of alimony and child support. I had given up all of my resources that I acquired at that point in my life were taken from me in the divorce, and I was at rock bottom, and I didn't perform well often enough in that. It's a place I look back on, and I don't have shame about it anymore. I look back on it, and I have empathy for that character, and yet it's something I want to learn from, so I never do again. In that process, I remember taking my son to school, and he was probably 9 at the time. I was dropping him off, and he did something that just set me off. He didn't do anything significantly wrong. It wasn't on him. It was just a reflection of the state that I was in that was really unhealthy. And I remember just yelling at him in the car right before I dropped him off to school. And he got out, and I saw him walking into the school, just his shoulders down, his head down, just feeling really bad about himself because I had gotten mad at him about something that was really stupid. And that feeling of just shame set in on me so hard in that moment. I'm watching him, and I'm just like, man, I'm a piece of shit. And now I'm going to go through my whole day, just beat myself up. I knew the process, how it was going to unfold. Is what I always did whenever I made mistakes like this, is that I felt like I had an obligation to be my worst enemy, like my biggest critic. And there was a voice that caught me right there, and I feel like it was the voice of God. It was a higher voice. It felt very much like it came from outside of myself. I was in this place of starting to melt down, start kicking myself again like I'd been conditioned my whole life to do. And this voice said, "Hey, just skip that part. You don't have to feel this." And I stopped because it was such an unusual thing to happen. I
Right.
stopped and I would listen. I was like, "What?" It's, "Yeah, just don't do this part. Instead, get to the good part where you learn from it and you do better." And I made a concerted effort right there that I was like, "I'm not gonna shame myself today. I'm not perfect, and I know that, and I'm struggling, and I also gotta have some grace for myself." That doesn't mean what I did was okay. There's no justification for it, and I wasn't doing that. But instead, I was skipping the wasted part that just makes it worse and doesn't help you. I skipped that shame part. And instead, I went to work, I gave it my best. And when I came and picked my son up from school, I had a real heart to heart conversation with him where I truly apologized for what I did. And I made a commitment to him. I was never going to do it again. I'd have this day to like really reflect on how I was going to be a better dad. And I took him out to get his favorite treat and do his favorite activity. And we just had this really cool bonding experience, me and my son. And I was able to do that because I skipped the whole shame part. I didn't come pick him up from a place of being shamed. I came and picked him up from a place of being empowered now to change myself and to change the relationship with my son. And I've never gone back to it. I've never ever treated him like that again since then. That was a moment for me to really have a come to Jesus with myself and to say,
It's
"Hey,
amazing.
what?" And I didn't shame myself. And that was the brilliant
Yeah.
part of it. I didn't go down that. So how do you avoid that? Hmm. I don't know if there's like a bullet point thing that you can do, but it starts by recognizing that shame is actually, at the end of the day, it's self-indulgent. You're doing it in
Yeah.
some way, weird, morbid way for yourself. And it's running on bad programming. It's running on all this conditioning that we've had, but it's not actually helpful for the process. What's helpful to the process is learning from what our mistakes and then getting back up and doing a little bit better or a lot better if you can. You make some changes. And that's where you really drop off a lot of the dead weight that holds us back from making improvements, because when you feel shame or when you shame others, it doesn't improve them. It doesn't improve you. It doesn't make things get better because you shame somebody into being a good person. That's just not how it works. You encourage people into being better people. You change the identity that you have for yourself. Like, how do you identify? Oh, I'm a piece of shit. I am is the strongest two words combined in the English language. I am, because you say that, it becomes your reality. I'm a piece of shit, then that becomes your reality. I'm learning, I'm developing, I'm getting better. Both of those things are true. They can be true in the same moment. You have the negative truth and the positive truth and everything. And it's learning how to orient yourself towards that positive truth instead of the negative truth.
And that awareness of self in the moment is so important because your kids actually get trained on your nervous system. So you might have up a good wall and they might not see, you might have a level of stoicism, but they always know what's going on internally with you because it's always an energetic exchange. So if you're continually going on and feeling those thoughts, feelings, and emotions going through you all the time, that's ultimately their inner dialogue. And then that's what they have to live with and deal with and break free from later on in their own lives. So
Yeah, I mean,
I'm glad that you mentioned that.
and that's the most important inheritance that you pass on to your children is the type of energy that you infuse into them that obviously starts with yourself. So that was a brilliant point that you just made.
Shifting gears real quick, what sparked the creation of the Doughboy movement? Was there a personal moment where you realized men needed this type of community?
Yeah, it's been evolving over the years. I started doing this whole quote unquote influencing thing about a year and a half ago, a little over that. And it came from a real need to speak up. I actually didn't want to do it, and I don't like doing it most of the time, to be honest with you.
Well, thanks for being here either way.
Yeah, no, I like these. I love these types of conversation. I think this is great, but the whole
Yeah.
process of, hey, I'm going to talk to a camera or to in some setting of talking to others, and that I have something important to share with other people felt pretentious. It felt a
Yeah.
little like forced, and it felt like, who am I to be lecturing anybody on anything? And yet at the same time, I recognize, especially in the line of work that I'm in, with I hire literally thousands and thousands of young men every year. Well, not every year, but over the course of my career, thousands of them to go out and do the hardest thing that they're ever going to do, knock doors, and to train them and to manage them and to see how many of these young guys show up without a great framework. But they want one and they want to know how to do this better. And I see the catalyst that this experience has been for them to really develop themselves into men and how much of a change it's made. And I recognize there was a real need for this uh, beyond my company, but generally speaking, for men in general. And so I started posting stuff up, and like within 5 reels of me just talking about what I thought helped me, what I thought was important life lessons. I think my fifth reel went and got multiple millions of views. Like, it just blew up. And I'm still surprised to this day that anybody listens to me, because I'm just a dude. I am just
Yeah.
sharing my thoughts, and I've had some various degrees of success. So I have some things that I think are really important to share, but at the end of the day, I'm just sharing what my thoughts are. And so that's how it started. It didn't start with any concept of being more constructive than that. It was just to put stuff out there in the ether, in the metaverse or whatever, and say, here's something that's helped me and a way that I've oriented myself that I think makes a lot of sense. And it's resonated so well. And I've had a lot of guys over this year and a half journey a lot reach out to me. Do you do any mentorship? And I've seen so many mentorship groups spring up, which gives me an enormous amount of encouragement for the future, because
Yeah.
I think the biggest threat to society right now is weak masculinity. It's just every other problem that we have in society stems somewhere from men being weak and not showing up. And I'm not blaming men like all of these factors are men's fault, but it's our responsibility. It's us as men to take responsibility of the state of affairs. And seeing so many men start to speak up and so many men seeking for mentorship and being connected in this wild social media verse where you can talk and millions of people can hear it. And you can talk to people in India and Africa and all over
Mhm.
the United States. It's crazy cool, man. Like, we get a lot of hate on social media, and there's a lot of reasons to hate social media. I'm not oblivious to those either, but there's so much that's good about it. And one of these things is that men are starting to gather again in tribes. And it's
Yeah.
something that we've evolved since the dawn of time to do. Like, we are healthiest when we are in a good tribe. We've been conditioned by society to give up our tribe for a myriad of different reasons. Like, we're told, hey, once you get married, that's your most important relationship. Don't have any friends. But the truth is, good tribes make good men. You are the product of who you surround yourself with. And so seeing these groups spring up, and then seeing a real need in the people that were following me on social media is where Doughboy started from. And the concept of Doughboy is basically the quote unquote fireside of sitting around with other men and talking about issues that really matter, not in some therapeutic way. Let's just get deep into our feelings and feel sorry for ourselves about blah, blah, blah. It's about leveling up, being constructive, and owning the place that we're in it without shame, like recognizing we're all coming from different starting points, and that's okay. And no, we haven't arrived. None of us have. Wherever you're at on the journey of life, nobody's
Cool.
arrived. So you're in the same boat as everybody else. We're all just trying to
Rule
move
of
up that
life, man.
mountainside. Exactly. So how do you orient yourself towards that? How do you put together a framework that actually works? How do you start to shift the way that you think? And that's what Doughboy is designed to do, is invite guys to come be part of the tribe. Come sit down with us on Sundays on our live Zoom calls where we do question and answers and we tackle these different aspects of masculinity. Be involved in the chat groups, be involved in the accountability journals that we have, so you can actually measure what gets measured, gets improved. So we have daily accountability journals, we daily KPIs that we're measuring ourselves on and holding ourselves accountable to. And it starts there, I think, fundamentally for a lot of guys to start making some of these critical changes in their lives.
And for the guys out there that are thinking about starting your own group, I want to highly encourage you to go and do that. I was talking with another content creator that's big in the space, and he made mention that how many people can you as an individual impact in your lifetime if you do this for 20 years, let's say? Are you going to do this for 20? Maybe. I don't know. Who knows? Right? We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but say you can impact so many people per year. It ends up being like 250 people in a 20-year period. That's nothing in the scope of think about all the billions of users all over social media that are impacted by your content. Start the group, put yourself out there, allow yourself to share your mission and your vision with the world, and share your story because your story is going to be what helps somebody else.
That's honestly been the biggest reward by far of the social media journey and what's kept me going, aside from the fact that I made a commitment to do this for a certain period of time and I wasn't going to quit, is getting feedback like that. Like initially it's grown, but I get men reaching out to me all the time. And a lot of women too, surprisingly. My viewers, my followers have increased the percentage of women that are following my content. And I'm just a guy talking to other guys generally has really been encouraging too to see how much support we've received from that. But how many people have reached out and have told me that my content mattered to them. I had a guy message me, and this is indicative of a lot of messages, but this one was probably one of the most poignant ones. A guy messaged me and he was like, dude, I was going to kill myself today. I watched this reel. You gave me enough to fight through another day. Thank you for doing that. And all the negativity you get in social media and all the stress and the headache of it, and there's a lot, if you haven't been on the journey, is really like, it's all worth it if you just get one message that's like that. You help somebody. And when you get a lot of messages like that, you're doing something that's good. And that's really what this is about. This whole movement, not myself. I'm not just relegating this to myself, but this whole movement of us men taking ownership of our masculinity again and coming together as brothers is really about that, about leveling each other up and doing something to make another brother of yours out there, wherever they are, their life a little bit better. And all of us start doing more and more of that. It makes an indelible effect on everything in society.
And that's the mic drop. Adam Allred, thank you for being here today. I appreciate you.
Jason, my pleasure, man. I'm really grateful you had me on the show. I'm glad we could do this.
Yeah, tell everybody how they can reach you and work with you.
Yeah, so Adam Allred Official is my handle on social media. Come join the party. Be part of it, man. Love to see you there. Like, I try to reply to the comments on my posts. It's hard to keep up with them, so I'm not always there, but I try. And then if you hit me up with DMs, I'll reply to you at some point. It takes me a while sometimes to dig through the DMs, but I will always reply back. Yeah, come follow me on social media. And then on YouTube, we're actually launching a new show next month. It's going to be just me and my buddies sitting around a fire talking about things that matter.
Yeah, I like that.
So check us out on YouTube. The show has yet to be announced. I don't have a page to send you to, but it'll definitely be on my social media when we start launching it. So we'll have links there and everything.
And Adam, thank you so much, man.
Thanks again, Jason.
Yeah.